you're offering this to with him.
Mm-hmm.
You're not like engaging in some conversation, like hanging out. Like, no, it's facing the tabernacle.
Right.
Like, we're offering this sacrifice and you're a part of it. Like, this is why everyone at the Latin Mass is like in a suit. Everyone, they have a veil. Like, we're kneeling. Everyone's locked in. The altar servers are like military. Like, this is a real sacrifice. This is true worship because it's not about you.
Welcome back to another episode of PPK. Back at it again, as usual. What's up, boys?
What's going on?
Another episode, man. These have been flying by, yeah?
I know.
Zooming, we're running out of ideas, so please help us.
Yeah, because send us, help us. Right. No, it's actually been good. We've been getting a lot of feedback, especially on the last several episodes as we've been kind of addressing things in the culture and in the world and in the church and just everything that's around us. And so we do appreciate for those of you who are listening, and even those of you may be joining us for the first time, we definitely appreciate you checking us out and letting us know what you think. So kind of building off the last episode, right now is our time. We were reading from the then Father Joseph Ratzinger in 1969 off of his quote and speaking to the future of the church and talking about being a much more smaller but a much more faithful church. And, you know, we've had, our discussion on the true presence already, an episode on that. But it's kind of, we're going to kind of pull those two together in the sense of, okay, now what does that mean, right? So it's really easy during these crazy times for us to kind of lose our sense of peace. We've been talking about that, to kind of lose our bearings. The last episode, Keone, you were talking about how friends were asking, like, is the world coming to an end? And and if it is, like, what are you going to do about it, right? How do you prepare for that? So I think this episode, we're really going to talk about, especially for us as Catholics, what does that actually mean? And that's, for us, is really the source and summit of our faith, the Eucharist, which ultimately is experienced through the highest form of prayer for us, which is the Mass. And there's a lot of perspectives and points of views on which version of the Mass, right? So for those of you who are familiar with Vatican II, the council held by the bishops in the 1960s, the mid-1960s, where we had essentially the change of the vernacular, that the Mass for up until that time was done in the traditional Latin form, which we are aware of in a certain way. And then through the Vatican II Council, it changed to, the faith far more involved. It's in the vernacular and the common language of the people. And, some will say that while the spirit of Vatican II, the intent of Vatican II was perhaps good, the execution of that has been a little bit questionable, right? And less subpar, if you will. And we can see that, and we were talking about, as we were preparing for this episode, about statistics that we've talked about on previous episodes, as well as people losing their faith, especially in your guys' general area of age in your peer group, where 79% of people that leave the church are in your age group. 50% of Catholics are leaving the church. And now, given the pandemic that we're in, we've been stripped of the sacraments because we've been deemed as non-essential. Thanks a lot. Faith is non-essential, and we're being violated in that sense. But we wanted to kind of break that open, talk a little bit about the Mass, even our own transition of our experience of the Mass, because I would say where we are today, where you two are today, versus even 2 years ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, completely different with regards to your approach to the Mass. So let's start there. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. And just kind of talking about the change in the Mass, and especially I guess we could start with our transition, right? And so obviously the thought growing up going to Mass is like, I'm not going to get anything out of this. This is like something that I have to do. I understood it. And I mean, sometimes I was pretty butthurt about going to Mass, I guess, growing up. But like, as you get older, you understand, like, this is something I need to do. Like, okay, I'm just going to do it. This is not something I ever think I'm going to, like, go against or like revolt against or whatever. Like, I understand this is a part of being a Catholic, and I'm never going to like not try to do that. And it just kind of becomes like, I guess you're trying to figure out and focus on different parts, and you want to understand the reading, and you're really waiting for a good homily, and then that's really about it. You're just like, you know what, if I can get a a baller homily right now, like it'll be a good mass today. Or if I can just make sure I at least don't have to read the reading 7 times in a row because I can't pay attention to, and if I could just pay attention to the readings, then like, okay, I got enough out of it. And, not understanding a lot of things like, are you certain sins that you can't receive the Eucharist, or just all these kind of things that you don't really realize because not a lot of people are telling you, or maybe they are in your catechism class, you're just not paying attention because that's just a classic, cultural Catholic kind of move right there. And so it kind of you kind of grow on it. So it's first is like, okay, you know what, let me pay attention to the readings, and if I can kind of just get a good little verse out of this, then okay. And then it becomes kind of like, you know what, let me try to put some meaning into the responses that I'm saying. And then you finally get to a point where we're at right now, and it's like, well, it's not even about the responses. It's about what you're bringing spiritually and what's going on in your head. You could say all the good things you want, or you can put the emphasis on the words that you want, but unless you're at the place where you're offering that sacrifice with the Lord during the consecration, during the entire Mass itself, then the Mass doesn't become anything, and it becomes a point of like, what are you getting out of it instead of what you're putting into it. And so, that's kind of the tradition, which you guys can both talk more into. And unfortunately, it seems like with Vatican II, it kind of flipped that reversal where it became the language they use was active participation, right? And for some reason, whether this is an intent and not, like, we're not here to argue intent, we're just here to argue with the results, and the results are pretty garbo. So that's all we're going to talk about. And active participation seemed to be like more talking on our side, because we go to Latin Mass now, and there's not a lot of, we're not saying the Our Father altogether. We just say, but deliver us from evil, right? Or we're not saying all these things. Like it's the priest's job to offer that sacrifice mostly. And we're offering ourselves into it. We're not offering these prayers because we don't really have those places in that. We don't have that kind of authority to offer a certain sacrifice of this magnitude. He's actually making bread into body and all this kind of stuff. There's not much we can do besides offer our own sacrifice, our own sins, our own failings, our own crosses. And so what it seemed like Vatican II unfortunately did was make this more about, okay, let's face the people. Let's make sure that everyone feels like they're a part of it. How about we throw in some girl altar servers? They need to feel like they're a part of it too. Let's do, all these things. And I think, just as time went on and things started just kind of get dumbed down, if you're divorced or civilly remarried, you can still receive, and not taking it serious enough. And we're taking down the kneelers, and we're just saying, you can receive in your hand now. And what does that do to our conscience? Is that like, well, this is becoming lax, so it must not be as serious as it used to be. It seems like, we're good. I don't have to wear a suit, I don't have to wear a Sunday best. Now we can just have Oceans playing, and we're on our jeans and flip flops, and we're just vibing with each other, and we can just go up and you receive on our hands, and maybe do little tricks with it, put on our head, all this kind of stuff. Instead of saying, like, if you tell someone the only way you were to receive this is on your knees and you don't get to touch it, how serious do you think that becomes for them and their own psyche, and just understanding like, wow, this is for real. Not just like, hey, make sure you just do this, and you just have to make sure that your right hand covers your left, and you don't want to do left hand over right and that stuff. Oh, sick! This is insane. This is the peak of our Mass. This is crazy. And you don't think that, and so it's like we want to look at it as rules or whatever. John the 23rd and Pope Paul VI were thinking. We can't really say, but we can just say the results of it seem to be a Mass that has been watered down, unfortunately, and it shows because people weren't showing up. Whether it's our own church, which we talked about many times, or churches across the world.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part is, the biggest distinction between us and our Protestant brothers and sisters is the true presence, right? And did an episode on it. And so just imagine bringing your Protestant friend to Mass, and you're like, that's Jesus, man. We truly believe that's Jesus. And when we go to receive him, it just looks like a line getting soup, at a soup kitchen. We're just putting our hands out, and then we walk away. And it's like, if this is truly Jesus, what do you, in their studies I've shown, like, there's particles that can be left on your hand, and that you can, now it's in the hand, and now you rub it on the pew, or you put it on your shirt, and it's like, now Jesus is almost like disrespected, in a sense,
When we think about a desecrated host, right? We think that it's an abuse of, if that's really the body, blood, soul, and divinity, which we believe is the true presence. What are we doing? Rubbing it, dropping it.
Yeah, and what better witness than, like Meeks was saying, the kneelers in the Latin Mass, and everyone's kneeling, and it's just the priest who offered the sacrifice on our behalf is giving us now the Lamb of God. Like, what a witness that is. That is so counter to any Protestant religion, anything in culture. We're on our knees receiving something so humbly. But just kind of going back to the transition in my own life, and Meeks, it's pretty similar. Just kind of growing up, and it was like you just obey, right? You obey. And honestly, it was cool just because our family went, you know, and it became a habit. So you just anticipate it. And it wasn't until Franciscan, when I went to Franciscan, that it was like, okay, you know, now I feel it more. Now I'm choosing, you know, no one cares if I go to mass. Dad's not, you know, you're not talking to me. Mom's not pressing me. We don't have to schedule around my basketball games. It's like, I'm going to mass with my teammates or with my classmates. You know, that's my choice in college. And then after college is when I really started diving into the Latin mass, and you start to see it for a whole new, like, this is what mass is supposed to be. And like, I think we're talking about this before, as the church, as our Catholic mass became more modern, I think all of us, we've began to crave more of the traditional. And I'm just thinking about, you know, we say the mass is the wedding feast of the Lamb, right? It's the ultimate sacrifice. It's when heaven and earth kiss, you know? And just the beauty of that. And I just can't help but think about, you know, I'm preparing for marriage in October, and you think about the wedding feast, right? You think about what is love, like, you know, and a covenant, like covenant language is all throughout scripture, right? And the mass, if it's the pinnacle of our faith, if it's the pinnacle sacrifice, you should see those themes in scripture. And so I think about with every relationship, whether it's with God, whether it's with, you know, your spouse or your brother or your family, it starts with obedience, right? God wants to know, are you going to do this even if you don't understand it, because you love me? Even when I don't choose to love my fiance, or if I don't feel like loving it, I still have to be obedient. I made a commitment, you know, I'm going to honor that. So first starting with that obedience, and then the knowledge grows, right? And then it's now you're obedient, but now you need to learn more. And like with more knowledge comes greater love, right? Greater appreciation. And so I think in my own life, you know, I learned to be obedient, and then you start to want to learn more. Okay, I'm here every day, I might as well learn something. And then the more you learn, the more God reveals to you the beauty of what it is and how unworthy we are. That's what the beauty of getting on your knees to receive. It's like, you're so unworthy. And those words that you respond in mass, like, you're so unworthy to even say that. That's why in the Latin mass, you're not saying anything. And rarely do you say something. And it's like, and I think it says it on the bracket. I don't know, Meeks, you remember? It's like, we have basically no part in offering the sacrifice. We just get to participate, and we get to kind of just be present there, because that's why the priest is facing away from us.
Yeah, it's like
know?
he's entered, for those of you who are familiar with the Old Testament, he's entered the Holy of Holies. There's nothing we can do to elevate that, because we're not the priest. And I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I'm just, you know, thinking about just in any covenant relationship, and that's what God, you know, wants us to elevate our relationships to, which we really suck at it. Everything we do is usually contractual. But it's like, even with my fiance, you know, I'm going to obey, I'm going to honor her. And then the more I know her, the more I get to love her. And it doesn't take away from that obedience. And I think so for our journeys, it's more of like, we started out obeying, and then we started to learn more. And now, as the church has tried to go more modern, more, you know, progressive, it's a lot of us that have wanted more traditional, because why do we want to look like the world?
That's right. Yeah, I would say one of the things that, you know, again, pointing out, I think you made the point, Meeks, but we were talking about, actually both of you, but how, you know, the church was in the extraordinary form, the Latin form, for so long, and then they tried to kind of, you know, not to say that there was malintent, but wanted to get people more, the term in the Vatican II is active conscious participation, right? To try to bring the people into it for whatever reason, because, you know, people didn't understand the Latin. We even struggle right now, but it forces us to get more deeper into the meditation and the prayer and the meaning of the Mass, right? And we're learning the Latin parts of the Mass. So, and the funny thing about with Vatican II is the Latin parts weren't supposed to go away, right? You're supposed to actually universally, like when we talk about going to World Youth Day, and you're with 183 countries, and what unifies us? One, the Mass; two, the Latin parts of the Mass, because people from Brazil, France, Spain, Portugal, United States of America, Indonesia know the Latin parts of the Mass, right? And we experience that when we go to something like a World Youth Day. But it went from, so you think about the church going from the tradition to the more modern, and then you think about our experience, which is the same, going more modern to more traditional. And, you know, I would say we went from more milk and honey and emotional. You guys are talking about obedience, obviously, as a parents telling you, like, y'all need to go to masses. We're Catholic. This is what we do. But even so, we're taking you to a more, youth mass, right? So people hear like Life Teen and all those other stuff. You hear a lot of that out there where it is going to be more secular Christian music, less about the traditional hymns that are appropriate to the worship, but it's going to feel more like praise and worship. And then that way it's a little bit more appealing to you, right? And it's a little bit more, engaging for you, right? And that's the emotional side of faith. It's the sensory side of the faith versus coming now to where we're like, honestly, when we go to those now, what is it? Unless we're specifically going to praise and worship, right? But when we're talking about the context of the Mass, it actually irritates us. Right? We get in there, we're like, why is this all this noise? Or now what do we have people doing? Now people are clapping for the choir because the choir is doing something amazing, I guess, at the Mass, right? No, they're not. So great. We're blessed for brothers and sisters that can sing, or, just that whole entertainment concert-like mentality. And it just takes away from what just actually happened at the altar. We do the Mass, brothers and sisters out there, because Jesus told us to. Do the Last Supper. Do this in memory of me. Right? We talked about this in the Royal Presence. Unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. This is why we call it the source and summit of our faith. This is at the core, it's a key sacrament because it's Christ himself. And so for us as Catholics, it's the highest form of prayer. When we talked about it, there's a thin veil. We talk about that in the Mass. This is the closest we are to heaven, this side of it. Right. So we would say at the altar, this is why it's so important, the reverence of it, where you have the tabernacle where the bread, the body, blood, soul, and divinity is present. You have the thinnest veil between heaven and earth. And we can see all the angels and the saints and God himself coming down, right? Especially when you see the priest calling down, they call it the epiclesis, when he puts his hands over and calls down for the Holy Spirit to turn this bread into his body and the blood into the wine into blood. He's calling for the Holy Spirit. And you can see at that moment, man, it gives me chills just talking about it. You can see the angels and the saints all, right, converging at that point of the Mass, because now we're bringing heaven and earth, and it's when they kiss. So, that's kind of been that journey for all of us, is kind of moving to a more mature faith. Less about the milk and honey, more about the meat and potatoes. And we talked about this too, Kenny, before. We talked about the primary, especially as a Dominican, right? The primary virtue is knowledge because it leads to love. And I think you're speaking to that real time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that changed the game, I was pulling up this picture I took of the, I don't know what it's called exactly, but the little guiding book for the Latin Mass that we have.
The Roman Missal.
Yeah. And so what it says, one of the first paragraphs when you first start your first kneeling, and the priest is up there doing his beginning prayers or whatever it is, and it says, truly attending Mass means actively seeking to identify ourselves with Christ and the sacred host. Pay attention to the words of the liturgical text, which are a mirror of the soul of our Lord as he offers a sacrifice to his Father. It means adopting his state of mind as far as we are able, in order to leave Mass with a will that is more apt to imitate Christ in reality. And so it has these little paragraphs and
kind of meditations,
and it kind of reveals these deeper parts of the Mass. And so what that made me realize is it was like, this isn't about me responding. It's not about me singing the Gloria. It's not about me holding hands with Our Father. It's about me understanding the Mass and being able to meditate on it in each state of what the priest is doing, me understanding why he's doing that. It's not about me being able to respond in that way. That takes away from me actually meditating and saying, okay, what is he doing here? Why is he doing it? And they go deep into meaning something. I think there's something about the stem of a flower, and right, and it talks about the dew of leaves or something like that, and how it all comes together.
I was talking about the chalice, and you're talking about the the theological virtues, but it starts to pull together theologically, right, everything that comes into the sacrifice and the worship of Mass.
And it's like, we cooked the bread at 110 degrees, and it was actually 110 degrees on the night that Jesus did that. It's like whoa, okay, this is fascinating. It really gets into it, and that's what it made me realize. One of the funny things is that Gavin McInnes video I sent you guys, and he's just talking about 10 reasons why I love church and stuff like that. And he was an agnostic before, and I talked about him on the podcast a couple episodes ago, but just talking about how everyone wants to do this secular form of meditation, yoga, and stuff like that. He's like, just go to Latin Mass. That's meditation. That's the highest meditation you can do, basically. And it's stuff that I never really thought about in that way, but that's truly what it is. And you kind of realize that as you grow in your faith, and you kind of grow in understanding what the Mass is really supposed to be. It has nothing to do with your own response. And in fact, I felt more like I've gotten more out of Mass when I'm kind of saying less and thinking more and actually putting myself in the state like this was saying, truly trying to offer up, okay, what is it that I'm doing? Understanding how unworthy I actually am to receive. And right before that moment, like it blows my mind how people don't all kneel at the point of like, I'm not worthy to enter my roof. And it's like, I'm not worthy, but I'm standing up the same way that you are right there. Like I'm looking eye to eye, like, no, I'm not worthy, dude. It's like, how's that? You know what I mean? How are we not all kneeling? I don't care what any bishop says. As a Catholic, you should be kneeling at that point. Doesn't matter what, if he says you don't have to kneel or whatever it is. Like, how do you say those words and mean it and not be kneeling at that point? And so it's like those things are just with intention and just saying like, no, I'm really not. And so that entire time when the priest is consecrating, it's not about us like responding or even looking up. It's about us understanding like, what are we offering in that moment that could say like, okay, I'm dying to myself as well. And I was just watching a Fulton Sheen video and he's saying that, you know, maybe we should be also saying this is my body, not in the sense of like we're helping out, but like this is me. I'm giving it up for you. Like this is, you know, this is me offering my own sacrifice in order that I may be transformed through the Eucharist or something like that.
Yeah, mutual gifts of persons, right?
What stood out to me, Meeks, when you read that opening kind of reflection going into the Latin Mass, and I read those for those of you like looking in to go into the Latin Mass, if they have them, those little paragraphs are absolute game changers. Like everything has such a deep meaning in our faith. It's so crazy, but just the idea of adopting the mind of Christ so as to imitate him more in our reality. I think so often we want God to like adopt our mind and our wants and like fit things to how we see. And I think that was kind of the danger, right? You're talking about Vatican II, it had a lot of good ideas and had the good intentions, but at the root of it, and I think for me personally, it seems as though like, you know, we look at the church and maybe the faithful aren't participating as much. Maybe they're not understanding it. And I think our first reaction is, okay, make God understand us better instead of us understand him.
That's right.
God, come down to my language. I'm speaking English. I don't do this Latin thing. So come on. Instead of like, no, this is the pinnacle. This is our faith. I want to learn more about you, Lord. And that's what the Mass says. Adopt his mind. And so I think there's good in it, you know, because you can, you know, a lot of different faiths have their culture in it. And so I think there could be beauty in that as well, but there's that danger that the devil always he makes his way in any good intention. He can twist it really quickly to where it's like, okay, now we dumped it down a little bit. And now not only do we go away from, or not only does it seem a little bit more prideful, like come down to me, now we lost the meaning entirely. This is why only maybe a quarter of Catholics believe in the true presence. And that's literally like the pinnacle of our faith, you know? And it's like, so did we do something wrong there? You know, in the moment when we're realizing that the Latin parts maybe weren't as understood as we'd like it to be, instead of changing it to your vernacular, why didn't we say, okay, let's understand the Latin Mass more, you know? Because that's the part that's unchanging. That's the part that continues to look otherworldly, you know, and we need that. That's why I think it's so appealing to us now over the years of going through the motions. And now I look at something and it's like, wow, like the priest his back is to me. Like you're offering this too with him. You're not like engaging in some conversation, like hanging out. Like, no, it's facing the tabernacle. Right. Like we're offering this sacrifice and you're a part of it. Like, this is why everyone at the Latin Mass is like in a suit. Everyone they have a veil. Like we're kneeling. Everyone's locked in. The altar servers are like military. Like this is a real sacrifice. This is true worship because it's not about you.
Yeah, and I think the key point to make for a lot of people, I mean, for everyone that's listening is, and it came to mind when you were talking about receiving. I mean, like both of you were mentioning it, but our bodies are communicating a reality at that point. And so when we're saying, if this was really God, to those who are going, man, you Catholics believe that's Jesus, right? And if they saw everybody coming and kneeling and reverent and not on their phones and not chatty Cathy and not sitting there high-fiving and clapping and just saw you walk in there and you sense God, right? Not just in his presence, obviously, but in the worship of the people. And God speaks to us in what? The silence. He speaks to us in those moments where we're meditating on him. And that's why the beautiful thing is the priest turns to us when he's talking to us. When he's talking to God, he's turning to God. Right? So it's like, and that's what we should be too. No, but no, I need you to look at me. Why? You're not God. Right? And that point you made about, yeah, we were made in the image and likeness of God, but often we try to make God in our image and likeness. And we want him to be like us. And we want him to, hey, I want a God who's, my bro, right? My buddy, my pal, that we can have. I'm like, no, this is the Lord who took on the sin of the world, and died on a cross for us. And that were the words we speak, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed. Right. And in the Latin Mass, we say it 3 times, right, in Latin, which is just amazing. Right. So the priest says it and then we say it. And it just transforms you. It actually breaks you down to a point where we're on our knees and our bodies communicate the reality of what's about to happen as close as it can. And I think that's a part of the encouragement. So let's talk about this moving forward, because we were talking about, part of the discussion was going to be, so what has this whole COVID thing done to us, right? Part of this issue now is, and we're trying to fight this, right? But the world is basically, and because there hasn't been a fight by our shepherds, that faith is non-essential now, right? You're not essential. Liquor stores are still essential. Planned Parenthood is still essential. Save Mart and Costco, they're still essential. No, nothing against y'all, right? You got to eat. But what about my spiritual nourishment? Right? And I think now people we are already, 25% of Catholics were going to Mass, right? We know that maybe 25%, well, maybe we can go 30% believe in the real presence. Now we were told it's non-essential. Now let's stream Mass, right? I can go to Mass in my bunny slippers, right? I can go and just wake up and not have to dress up. And maybe I wasn't even dressing up before. It's like, so we now just communicated a message we didn't want to communicate, because now that we are actually back and able to attend Mass, you see people running back to the Mass right now. Maybe some of them are scared or whatever, or trying to be prudent, but okay. So you mean to tell me that, this somehow we just stripped everybody of even any motivation. And so that whole point about Father Joseph Ratzinger at that point, Pope Emeritus Benedict, saying it's going to be a smaller but more faithful church is a real deal right now. And what does it mean for COVID? So maybe for us, how are we approaching it now? Or what do we see now through this COVID crisis and going into, I guess, this next phase of the church and the faithful?
Yeah, obviously, thing that's kind of like, I guess, semi-frustrating is like, understand we can only have, I think, 25% of our capacity. Is that what it is?
25% or 100 or whatever's less.
Yeah. So, and like the thing is, we go and we still don't see that. So it's like, how do we still see open spots or open little X's because they mark the spot where we can be, and we can only have a certain capacity of it. So then it's telling me, well, then people are just, well, I'm going to take what the bishop said. He said we don't have to go, so I don't have to go then. And that's what it is. It'd be different if it was like, okay, well, I'm not seeing the 30 elderly people that I usually see. That makes sense. Okay. But it's not that. It's going to be the youth, actually. It's the families that kind of were just, they went because they had to go, and, dad's there every other week or maybe once every 3 weeks. And those are for sure not going to be there. They don't got to go. So when the bishop tells us, then let me know, kind of deal. And so, that's what I've been seeing. I think our approach to it as we go back has to be the same approach of, I guess, really of every Mass, and understanding maybe the COVID has made us almost like more reverent, because like at least when we go, they still like have a spot, okay, if you want to go on the knees or whatever, but it's like, maybe not though, because they have said that it shouldn't be received on. Some people are trying to say we can't put the Eucharist on the tongue and have it put in the hands. So it depends on which parish you're at.
Right.
But I
fortunately
feel like
for us in our area,
it's been more reverent with the receiving part of it, and I've seen people. I think it just starts. I think people will just follow. Like maybe like we're one of the first people that go on the knees, and everyone else is going on the knees. And like, I don't think I've ever seen you go receive on your knees before in your life. I think people may just follow, and obviously, unfortunately, other things, other people will be, or other bishop will say, "Oh, we can't," or priest, "I can't do that on the tongue right now," and whatever about those guys. And it is also interesting how we can't sing, and they're going to make sure that we can't do all the things that we're going to limit the church as much as we possibly can, but we're going to let everything else go. But Chipotle, they got to keep going, dude. Like they got, it's just, I don't know, it's tough. And, we can't sing and we can't do all these things, but protest and all this stuff is allowed. And that doesn't have any effect at all on COVID, but only a church and singing that has that. You don't care about old people if that happens. You don't care about anything else. You're just selfish, and you're trying to use religion on all this other stuff. And that's fascinating. That's a topic for another day. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think right now during the pandemic, it's just like, it's just drawing in a line in the sand. You know, who was about it and who's not. And you know, we talked about this, I think 2 episodes ago. God never said that the road to heaven's gonna be just plentiful and you know, a 4-laner. You know, it's barely fit in 1 lane. You know, and you know, so it's just to a certain extent, it's like, are we surprised?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the face of it, there's going to be people who just get sucked up because of they're lukewarm and they get eaten alive. You know, and so I think for us, I find a lot of pride in the church right now because we think about, like Meeks was saying, we can't sing, right? Think about all the other Protestant, because I have a lot of, you know, Protestant brothers and sisters. I went to a Protestant high school. It was all singing. You know, like Pastor Bill goes up there, says his like hoorah speech for like 20 minutes, and then your concert. Let's get it, you know, with filling the vibes. That's like the majority of the service, you know, and like, unfortunately for the Protestants, like that's a huge part of their service was the worship, the praise and worship, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when you say you can't sing, it's like, well, what do we do? I guess Pastor Bill would say maybe 30 minutes to 45 speech, and then we'll go home, you know? But you think about the Mass, it's like, we don't need it. I think in a way, God is kind of saying like, guys, this is essential. You go and you participate in the sacrifice of the Mass, offering the body, blood, soul, and divinity to me, because that's the only thing worthy of my worship is myself. Because all your songs, everything, I understand, I love it, I use it, but the only thing truly worthy is myself. Because we're so like understand where you're at in comparison to God. Your songs are great, your praise is great, but at the end of the day, the only thing we can truly offer is Himself. And like, I think God is kind of, let's remind ourselves of that, you know? So I think it's a blessing. And I think a lot of Catholics, we need to start realizing that, taking pride in it, those who are going to Mass, go to Mass and appreciate it. Bring someone with you, you know? And we just need more of it, but can we be surprised if the numbers are dying?
No, that's real talk right there, because I think you're right. I mean, it's not a surprise. And I think this is a purging and a purification of the church. And I guess my challenge to the Catholics out there is, you know, as Keone said, the line is drawn in the sand. Which side are you on? You know, we don't need any more lukewarm or cafeteria Catholics. I used to be one. You know what I mean? It's like, we don't need it anymore. The church was full of it, and it's only done harm and brought scandal to people within the church and outside of the church. Right? It doesn't help when you don't believe, and you know you're communicating a non-truth, right, to the people around you. So I would just say one of the key blessings as we kind of wrap up this episode is the fact that we've been stripped of kind of the milk and honey stuff, right? Like there's no shaking of the peace and the bro hugs or anything like that. And it's only priests and deacons who administer the Holy Communion. So it's like, man, we're getting the glimpse of like, oh, there's a gift in all of this, right? So sure, we'd like to do some of the chant and some of the responses back, that so we can feel, there's humans in us, right? We want to feel like we're participating, and we're going to do that with our body, and we're going to do that with our voices and whatnot. But more importantly, as Miko said earlier, kind of doing that with our meditation and our minds and our prayer, right? Realizing that now is the time to enter into the true understanding and knowledge of what the worship and the sacrifice of the Mass is. I mean, we come before the altar of sacrifice under a crucifix. The greatest sin man ever created was they murdered God, right? We murdered God. We put him on a cross. And yet the greatest gift he gave us was he died for our sins. And that's something that we need to embrace as Catholics. And so the challenge, right, our protest, if you will, out there is get your butt to Mass. You know what I mean? If you're not, why aren't we filling it? Why aren't we filling these Masses to the brim? Maybe even sneaking an extra few over, the counter, right? Just slide in there real quick. Because if God was that important to us, it would show. Our actions would show. Our dress would show. Wear your best outfit to Mass to show God the reverence that He's due, right? It's giving God due worship, and only He alone can receive that gift on our behalf. So anyway, just something to think about, right? Something to think about. Meeks?
Yeah, and your second challenge is to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow our Instagram. That's 4 challenges for you.
Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. A little bit lighter this week on some things, but really a refocus, recentering, or reframing, a call back to the Mass. The source and summit of our faith is Catholic. So remember, this is a gift, and let's not take that gift for granted. So we'll see you on the next episode. And until then, get holy or die trying.